All right. As we get started here this morning, I'm just going to begin us with a land acknowledgement. Please make sure that your microphones are muted. Thank you so much. This morning, we acknowledge that we are on the traditional and ancestral lands of the Ute, Arapaho, and Cheyenne peoples, whose cultural practices and traditions continue to shape this region. We honor their rich textile heritage, which reflects a deep connection to the land and their communities. The Ute people are known for their intricate beadwork and woven bags, which incorporate natural materials and motifs representing their environment and stories. The Arapaho are renowned for their elaborately decorated garments adorned with porcupine quillwork, beadwork, and symbolic patterns that convey identity and history. The Cheyenne people have a strong tradition of creating adorned buffalo robes, blankets, and garments that use geometric designs and beadwork to represent their spiritual beliefs and life events. These practices are more than art, they are powerful forms of storytelling and expressions of resilience. We commit to honoring these traditions and recognizing the history and continuing presence of Indigenous communities here in Boulder, Colorado. Thank you all so much for joining us. We have a few announcements. I will hand the floor over to my colleague, Laura Devendorf.
All right, thank you so much, Stephen, and thank you all for joining us. Thank you to Francesca and Renata for joining us today and sharing your practice. On this screen here, we're just showing the series overall. Our next talk will be on March 5th with Jovencio de la Paz, and then we still have 3 more talks after that. So the series is going strong, and that's just been so exciting. It's been really great to convene both you in the audience and the speakers and learn more about each other. We are presenting this from the Unstable Design Lab. The Unstable Design Lab is a research lab at the University of Colorado Boulder in the Atlas Institute. We are on the 2nd floor. I don't know if that's relevant information, but here we are looking cute in our matching outfits with our special socks, some of which were hand knit because we're those kind of people. One of the main projects that we like to share or bring attention to is the AdaCAD project. AdaCAD is an open source drafting software that I think will resonate a lot with the themes we'll talk about today. It follows a parametric design approach so that you can design drafts a little more algorithmically. It is funded largely by the National Science Foundation, which is facing huge cuts at the moment. So please keep the National Science Foundation in your heart because it affects textiles and weavers as well. I just wanted to share maybe a little personal connection. The talk today is going to get into programming and creative coding. There is a tool called, well, when I learned it, it was called processing. Now it's more accessible as p5.js. And when I learned processing, maybe in early 2000, it was the first time I saw that code could be used in a creative capacity and could make visuals. So before then, all my coding activities were like, interpret the Jabberwocky code in an algorithm, and it wasn't relatable and it was all on text messages. And this was the first time I can draw, and it was such a huge inspiration for me. And really what's fueled a lot of the research in the lab is building the spirit of creativity, new tools with technology, and open source. My daughter Frankie actually learned P5 this weekend, and so we've been making sketches together. So it's easy enough for a 9-year-old to use, although Frankie's kind of wild. So, you know, she's not your ordinary 9-year-old, but she's really into it. And we've been making some cool pictures. So the talk today, as well as all the talks that we've hosted in this series and our past 2 series, are available via our YouTube archive. So you can find that here or via the Unstable Design Lab YouTube channel. But without any further ado, I am so excited to welcome Weaving X Coding with Renata and Francesca. They're going to talk to us a little bit about some projects they've been doing, most notably a series of workshops that really trace connections between technology development and textile traditions, creative coding and draft making, which are near and dear to my heart. And I'm so excited to share the space with them and to learn more. So let's give them a very warm welcome and round of virtual applause, which is those weird little Muppet hands in the corner, or just type something in the chat to say like, oh my gosh, yay. we can make the space feel a little more alive. But without further ado, I will turn it over to you both.
Well, thank you, Laura, for this warm welcome. It's great to be here. Francesca will share her slides in just a second and we can kind of kick it off. So, hi everyone, my name is Renata. My partner in crime today here is Francesca, and we're both the founders of the Weaving X Coding Studio. We started this adventure together in 2017, and we've been working together since then. A lot of the work that we do kind of translate, and like the outcome is through workshops, exhibitions, and collaborations. And today we're going to go over a little bit of some of those projects and also a little bit of what drove us to work with weaving in the first place and what we really tried to do through our work.
Yeah, so something that before we start, like something that is very, very important for us is to be very intentional with the work that we do. We really, like we see, we listen, and we try to share our perspective, also hoping that sometimes maybe this new approach can like show something different to a lot of people. I think our practice really resonates a lot with this piece of work from Joaquin Torres Garcia, which is an Uruguayan artist. This piece is called Nuestro Norte es el Sur, which is our north is the south. And these artists really wanted to create this new artistic language that really, really embraced Latin American indigenous cultures. So he sort of wanted, as you can see here, reverse the traditional artistic hierarchy that at that point was very dominated by European art, and really try to advocate for Latin America to really base its artistic and intellectual creations on its indigenous cultures. And we really think perception plays a really crucial way in how we shape understanding. In the same way he used maybe maps and geography to really influence our view of the world. You're going to see in our work that is extremely important how we really tell stories and how we share knowledge, because that's really going to impact how that's perceived. So I know we're going to start a little bit first talking about our work, our personal work. So I'll pass it back to Renata.
Thank you, Fran. Yeah, so the way that I actually started doing any explorations around weaving was from this idea that I had of a installation that was basically a weaving loom that would weave during the day and unweave during the night. This was clearly inspired by a character from the Odyssey, Penelope, that's kind of the way that she finds of actually controlling her time, even though she's living in that very mythological fate context. And then to start working on this project, I realized that I had to learn what this exactly means, like the weave and what is the structure like, and how you could potentially automate this machine that, as we've seen, like there's a wide range of going from like extremely manual labor to like extremely automated, right? And it really was a great opportunity for me to just like iterate. I think I've done like maybe 10 versions of a weaving loom, all sorts of weaving looms as a base. And what really this made me feel like is that I could explore textiles in a different way. So if we can go to the next slide, I can talk a little bit, just like in a high level, what I've done since then. So that experience kind of made me really free to think of like how technology, and I'm going to use technology in a very loose sense, but let's say like new technology, right? Things that we look at them and we consider, well, this is new technology, in comparison to textiles, which we look at it and we don't see it as technology, even though it is technology. How we could embed these things, right? So like how maybe textile method of productions can help to make a glove that it's going to be, lasting longer than your usual glove for someone that uses a wheelchair, or how can a textile actually understand how you interact with your body, like when you feel cold or so on. How can it actually empower you, right? So like a few of the projects that I did was really about how to leverage that embedded technology to empower women. And then right now, what's really top of mind for me is more about memory. And I would like to talk a little bit about an experience that I had in Berlin in 2019. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So in 2019, I lived in Berlin, and during that time, I had the opportunity of meeting a weaver, Maria Raquel, with whom I had an interesting deal with. So she would teach me how to weave from scratch on a floor loom, and I would teach her how to code. And to Laura's like point, like I was teaching her P5, and it was really fun to have that interaction. And through, you know, the time that we spend together, just like learning all these stories. And, you know, like this object that you see here on the right is the last thing that we weaved together. And we actually warped the loom with metal wire. And she was like all about like having fun and trying things out. And I have this little piece with me still until today. And I think that uh, the thing about this piece that really like it's really now like really top of mind for me is how like this piece it can hold like the memory of a shape that you put it, but also like there are a lot of memories that I have connected with it of the time that I was with my hihakel and the memories that we shared and we built together.
Yeah, so to talk a little bit also about my work and my first way of getting in touch with weaving, and this is one of my first attempts to do that. I was trying to really explore the relationship between traditional weaving and like what a computer could do for us. I would say that this project is what allowed me to find my material, to call it that way. I think there's this famous quote by textile artist Annie Alvarez that really talks about how we end up choosing our material, which means how do we end up choosing our means of communication. And that really happens accidentally because maybe something speaks to us and then we learn how to work with that. So I think this project, which I named Texere because texere is the Latin root from where the word text, context, and textile come, which I thought was a amazing coincidence to realize that, really allowed me to do that. It was my first attempt to really like build a loom with using like very simple materials like old nails and even some reclaimed wood. Yeah, at the same time, I think I was trying to explore the performative aspect of a practice that I have actually observed throughout my life, which is hand weaving. In this case, the pattern, I was trying to generate a pattern with the computer. So I coded this program, again, also started with P5, which is what started. In this case, I used JavaScript. And I was trying to code a program that could really capture the essence of an oral story that I heard. It was a story about the immigration story about a woman. And while I heard her, I really felt that the pauses she took, which is the moment that she took to really think and remember, were this sort of layer in what she was communicating that really had a lot of meaning itself. But those are the moments where you actually don't see. You don't see the pauses. So I sort of wanted to like really visualize that. And I asked myself, right, like, can I make those intangible layers of a narrative more real if I'm able to touch them? So that's why you see that those pauses and those moments are the ones that probably have the more predominant color here. From there, and of course, with all this inspiration from folk art and the use of language in oral societies, like I really wanted to find new ways of like crafting these unwritten forms of language. The project on the top, I named Kipu, which is really inspired by this old record system that was based on knots, and basically using some conductive thread, people could touch these pompons and listen to some stories. And the one on the bottom, it's a collaboration with artist Ashley Zelinsky and Dr. Laura Tolman, which was called Encrypted Bridge, which really took a lot of inspiration from like Morse, binary, hexadecimal code to really create a new language expressing knots. So people will come and try to like write their own messages in the form of knot on pieces of wool, like even choosing the color they wanted to choose and like how they wanted to do it, and really put them to this hand bridge that we created. And I think in general, also because since we are very inspired by like ancestral societies, there was this idea of exploring language more than communication, making language about dialogue. So dialogue in a way for equals, like this two-way exchange, which I think it's a lot of how all societies would see that language. And we thought that, I thought that was like really interesting in how we're trying to sort of craft this way. And from that, I followed some explorations that I think have to do with the interplay of haptic and visual perception. So in this case, using, again, code to really visualize layers of communication that we might miss. And honestly, I'm just using like a basic pixel grid on our screens. which of course really made me think about this interlacement between the warp and the weft of a weaving piece. And I really learned like through that there is so much exploration that can exist and so many connections just by even seeing the shapes of things. Like you are seeing a warp and a weft, you're seeing the pixels on your screen. So I thought that was very interesting. I went in to explore more of that. Again, of course, using a lot of P5.js, which you're going to hear a lot about today, but how cool it is that we can find a way to use really technology to show these hidden layers of information, which is great. But at the same time, as I think I read once, the world is really too abstract to not make things with our hands. So it was sort of like this combination of these two things. So that takes us to really talk about our first big project, which is, as I think you mentioned at the beginning, this is something that started in 2017 and it's still going on until now. It has taken different shapes, different forms, but I think that's also what makes us realize how much more there is to explore. So many years ago, Renata and I took a class that was called Teaching as Art, and it was really a class about pedagogy and like new forms of learning. And I think it really gave us the opportunity to connect our interests and explore our own curiosity and how to turn that into knowledge that then we could teach each other. And of course, at the same time, I think at that point, we had been learning a lot about technology for some time. And as two people that have crafted our whole lives, we ask ourselves, what if we had learned how to code while learning how to weave? Like, is there any connection? Like, maybe it would have been even easier for us to learn if we did it that way. So this is sort of how this workshop came to life. We really wanted to demystify weaving and coding, really showing the similarities, showing how there are so many things that are alike that are not often exposed. And yeah, I think we will talk about the invention of the first computer. We will talk about programming logic. We will really like do it. You could see even people like doing it on the iPad, doing it on the computer. We really try to get people to connect these two worlds without feeling that they are completely separated, right? Like as Renata said, we wouldn't look at computers as we look at computers as technology, but like weaving looms were a technology at one point as well. So we really wanted to create that bridge between those two things. And that even gave us the opportunity to design our own materials. Like before that call started, we were all talking about looms. We started designing like all these looms that you would see here, different frames. I think actually this is one that, it's a different one that we tried to reuse for a workshop we did a couple of months ago in San Francisco. And we just thought how cool it is that we can start creating even our own materials to do things like this. And something that was also very interesting is that the conversations that came out of these workshops, it was completely different to teach a workshop like this to a group of school teachers, to a group of PhD students, or even to teach to a group of weavers. Everybody had the same interest, but the conversations around them were so different that it became so refreshing. And that's why I think it's been several years and we continue like changing this workshop and doing it in different ways because there's still so much to explore. So I think that has been one of the most, I don't know, like enriching parts of doing this. Actually, because of one of the workshops that we did, we met in Santa Fe, New Mexico. We were able to create a collaboration with the Form and Concept Gallery in Santa Fe. This was a satellite show of the Currents New Media Festival. This happened in 2019. And we were talking about, like, I think that was a conversation that happened in one of our workshops. Like, we will show examples of artists that work in this intersection. And that created so much curiosity in our participants. Like, wow, how many people are doing this? Or how can artists use technology as a tool for their artwork? And we came up with this idea of beyond punch cards, innovative ways in which new technologies interlace with each other, which was, of course, very, very inspired by a woman that we think changed the world, with this Ada Lovelace. And which, for those who don't know, like really studied the complex engineering behind the Jacquard loom that then wrote the first computational algorithm. So we did, the interesting thing is that we did an open call for this. Like Renata and I think we both knew that we know so many artists working here. there's probably way more that we don't even know. So we did an open call, and actually these are just some images of the pieces that we ended up choosing at the end. People will have to artists had submitted their photos or descriptions, and it was so enriching to see how much interest there exists and how many different ways of applying this intersection existed. So we ended up with a couple of them. These are some of the pieces that we showed there. And even the way we distributed them in the space, there was a story to tell there. Like, what do we start with? How do we even really show the means in which these pieces were created? And it was also very interesting for us because a lot of these artists are artists we followed and we loved. So just being able to bring those pieces to tell these stories of beyond punch card, which was like a concept we came up with. So we were with even like AI, and it was really a really cool experience and sort of our first attempt to share similar knowledge that we would do on our workshops, but in a different form.
And I think that one thing that was very important to us from the beginning is that even though we were the ones curating this show, there was an element of a public engagement. So we were very fortunate that we were able to actually host 2 public program events, one of them being a performance by artist Yvonne Martinez, which you can see here through the pictures, which was a knitting performance. She's been actually doing this through her Twitch channel before this show, and I think Yvonne is still like doing this every now and then. But the proposal here was that people who would come in the gallery, they could design their own punch cards, and then at the end we would have this like huge piece with all the things that people have designed, and in order for them like to instigate them on what they would like to see knitted, we asked them what were their earlier memories around technology and what technology is. And then in addition to that, we also had a discussion panel with local artists and educators in which we try to put the conversation to be focused on craftsmanship, the role of craftsmanship in education and technological advancement, right? And this was actually one of like the fruits of our labor from the workshops. Another project that also came from this was the climate tartan. So June Julian, she's an artist and she actually attended one of our workshops. And she and her husband, they have a research that they've done a few times, which is an expedition to some of like the main archaeological sites in Scotland. He is an archaeologist in which they go and they document the impact of climate crisis in these archaeological sites. And one of the things that was very important about this project was to really understand the data behind it. So if we could go to the next slide, we're going to see a little bit of some of the iterations that we had. June was really kind and patient to like walk us through how they collected the data, how they defined the parameters, what really mattered to them. And then from those conversations, we started playing with iterations of what would be the most impactful way of displaying that data, right? And then we played with projection mapping. We played with like small proof of concepts of like gauze fabric and just dyeing it out and removing it and seeing what was the biggest impact that we could create. And we ended up in a visualization that it's based on another Scotland staple, which is a tartan. So for those who might not be familiar, a tartan is a very traditional Scottish textile that has a plaid pattern. And the thing that, at least for me, it was a big surprise when we started working with Junia, is that each of those plaids and colors and thickness, they all have a meaning. So like they are actually a representation of either a family or a clan. And curious enough, like New York, because there's such a big Scottish community, like New York has a tartan of itself. So like you see like the lines that represent like Central Park and the trees and the Hudson River and so on. So we landed in this visualization, which instead of trying to make the length of the bars proportional to like the intensity of the impact, we kind of did the opposite to create that impression of like the more impact you have, the less of this archaeological site you have, right? So you can see as an example, like on the far right, some archaeological sites are gone already because of those effects. And in the spirit of 2020 and all the things that have happened, we were a bit fortunate to say that June has been someone who's been quite present in Second Life virtual galleries. So she put a show together that was called An Unraveling Tartan that basically showed all the artifacts that she has been collecting, but also producing through her paintings and the digital tartan. So it was really fun to see like this like scale of a project, even though it's, you know, it's all virtual at the moment. And we definitely would love to have an opportunity to do it like in a physical output. And then this was also not the only project that was impacted by the pandemic. And this one is definitely a very dear project to us, which is our latest exhibition, which was a digital exhibition called Warping the Future, How Craft Led to the Digital World as We Know It. It was made possible by the Gottesman Library Art Fund at the Teachers College. And the thing that it's very important to us is that we really wanted to make sure that we were telling the story of how textiles have impacted computing, but through the perspective of the communities that maybe have not been highlighted more broadly in like your average, you know, history book or something. And of course, like the grant also had like a specific ask to connect whatever exhibition or educational experience that you might propose with their own archive. So it's also really fun to just be able to like look through teacher scholars libraries and other open archives to select and, you know, select the content, but also learn more about the content. So I think there are a few things that were very important to us. The first one was to definitely acknowledge which were the pioneer communities within textile and textile evolution, right? And then on top of that, like I was saying, like we were trying to leverage what the library could offer. So it was quite interesting and very like exciting to see that the library actually had a lot of content around textile and different communities that were pioneers in that. Another aspect that was very important to us in that project was to make sure that we were acknowledging the work and the labor of women in this. If we could go to the, yes, thank you. So either if we are mentioning how women were considered the first computers because they were literally, you know, punching the cards and making the math that was needed in order to store all of the data, or how the labor that women are, you know, like connected with in like a more stereotypical way, I guess, like the way that like craftsmanship is seen as like a woman's work, but actually like if you see the image on the top right, that actually meant that like this is how the memory, the core memory of the Apollo was able to navigate through the whole mission. And that was all because you had women from textile factories around the facility of NASA that was able to help them out. So we really tried to make sure that we were telling these things and not just like as an anecdote, but more as like this is the core of the history, the story that we're telling, right? And one thing that we also wanted to talk a little bit with you all is how we made sure that this exhibition was living digitally, but also could exist in some physical way. And in the next slide, we're going to see that there are a little bit of our process, I guess. So we, as I said, like we were really looking into what the library had within their archive, what the internet has, because like there's so much free accessible content. Like I think we're definitely big advocates of just like making content accessible to everyone. So we would like do a lot of detective work around finding, so like as an example here, we maybe I should go back and just say one very important thing about this exhibition, that all the objects that you see in the exhibition are in augmented reality. So if we go back to the next slide, sorry, friend. So all these objects that we thought that were like very symbolic, they were made in 3D models, and then they were made available to anyone who would like come visit the exhibition in augmented reality. So they could have those objects like in their house, right? Even though this is like a digital exhibition. So in order to build these 3D models with our 3D artist, we did a lot of work around what are all the angles that we can find of this one specific object? How the hell does the jacquard loom works, like in that little machinery, like at the top? And it was a lot around like looking at what like information is accessible, doing sketches, doing schematics, and then eventually like having that final object. Um, and yeah, and with that, Fran is going to give a little walk through the stations that we had through this exhibition.
Yeah, so the way we designed this exhibition, it was based on three main stations. And I mean, as Renata said, this was meant to be something experienced in person. And we ended up moving it to being digital, with, I would say, like at the end, ended up working really well, especially because we know a lot of people were able to access it through wherever they are, even our own families that are not here, which I think was really, really nice for us. Our first station was really focused on exploring the history of these weaving looms. And like, as Renata said, like, how do we highlight the techniques and the communities that pioneer in the practice? So we really use these objects as the core narrative structure to tell this story. So we will start, as you see here, with a backstrap loom, and you will see other types of looms as well, like a war-weighted loom. And the thing is, like, you will go through all of them. You will be able to use, if you were accessing from your phone, use AR and even place them around you and walk around the object. And as Renata mentioned, like, we were very, very specific about the details we wanted to show. We really didn't just want to find like some like 3D models. We worked with a 3D artist to just build those models in the way we wanted to. And you will read a little bit of the history and even see some images based on each of them. That was the very cool part about being able to work with the library, which, interesting enough, we really felt this was the project that was perfect for us at that really specific point. We had done so much experimentation just by trying it out, going, finding something, playing with it, playing with the materials, and like testing out things and seeing how it works, that when it was cool to go and then see, wow, there is so much academic research behind this. And okay, we're not that crazy. It actually makes sense what we've been doing. We were going on the right path, so we can keep going. So this first station talked really a lot about these looms. And then we will move to the next station, where basically we were exploring how the punch card system really led to the invention of the first computational algorithm, and then, of course, to the invention of the first computer. So in this case, our like big object, and Renata showed the example of how we thought about creating this model, was the jacquard loom. But then you will also be able to see a punch card reader, and we added this sort of like activity where you could be able to create a pattern by just clicking on the circles of the punch holes, and then just see how the pattern will weave. And we wanted to add this sort of like interactive part to it, where people can really create these small logics. I create these very small connections, which is similar to what we try to do with our workshops. And then we had a third station with, of course, I'm pretty sure we're very inspired also by Beyond Punch Cards, and we really wanted to continue highlighting the work of other artists here. So we did a selection of some pieces that we really loved, and we tried to offer some options. So thinking about machines as humans, you see that we played around this language a lot throughout the different stations, and you will be able to read about the artists and to see the piece and even like get a link so you can continue learning more about it. So those were the three main stations. We also realized that there was so much content behind it. There was so much really to share that we started thinking what other ways of doing that existed. And we started playing with social media, even probably for the first time for us. And we realized, can we just start having a different format for this content, so people at least could learn one small thing about each of these objects, which is what we did. And we did that with all the 3D models. You will be able to use them on Instagram, again, place them around you, which we love this idea of creating your own museum around it, and just work and walk through it, and being able to see the small details, turn it around, and at the same time, learn something about it. So I think there was this idea of like continue learning. And then another part that was also very important was we were able to curate this book collection as part of the library. And we went and looked for like all these different, there's so much research, as I said, like so many books around it. But there was something that really meant a lot for us, was we wanted women authors, because there's so much of these that haven't been heard from the voice of women, which has been so important in this history, that we only wanted this time to really highlight women authors. So that's what we did. And there was so much around that. So we were able to share that the Gottman Library really published a whole article about all the different books that you could access. And that was a really another way of looking at it as well. Like, how do we continue sharing this knowledge? And then we continue with our public programs, which I think it's a very, very important and like part of who we are. How can we continue the conversation? That's amazing. We created this piece, people go and experience it, but what happens next? So we really invited some of the artists that were part of, that we selected to be part of this third station. And we had this series that we called In Conversation With. And each of them would look at this intersection from completely different lens. It was completely different. And that's what the conversations were so rich around them. So this is an example of the ones we chose. And again, maybe one of the benefits of doing this virtually is like we did have a lot of people joining from different places. So we just wanted these to be something that just wouldn't die when the exhibition ended. What else can we talk about it? What happens after that? And yeah, so that's a little bit like sums up a little bit of most of our work. These are the pieces that we chose. We really wanted like to highlight. There's like a whole history of how each thing we've done has probably like influenced the next thing we did, which is, I think, our way of experimenting. These are two things that are coming up next for us. So the first one, we're going to be doing a Rack Life workshop with the Museum of Craft and Design in San Francisco. Rack Life is an exhibition that's going to be happening. I think it's already live in San Francisco. It really brings different contemporary artists who use the rag as a medium to address cultural issues like religion, technology, social justice, housing, environment. So we're going to be working on a workshop. We're going to be doing that virtually. We're going to have people there helping us with all the materials, doing that. And then something that we're extremely excited because we're going to be in Boulder, Colorado at the end of July. To participate in experiments in public art. We are based on Warping the Future. We are designing an augmented reality workshop, and we're going to do 2 full days presentation at the Canyon Theater there. So for those who are in Boulder, Colorado, we would love to meet you all. So we're going to be there just in some months. And yeah, with that, I think we conclude. I don't know, Tata, if you want to.
Yeah, yeah, that was all that we had to present today. Thank you all for listening in, and I think we're ready to answer any questions or hear any comments that people might have.
Well, thank you so much, y'all. I'm so grateful for everything that you brought to light today and for talking about your work. Thanks for being here. We're very excited to have you here in July in person, so that's going to be a great workshop as well. We had a few questions this morning to start us off. One of the questions we had was this morning was a question about the relationship between, I mean, of course, you addressed this many times in your work, but there was a particular question on the relationship between history and data, but they were actually specifically curious about the idea of activator of interaction or what it meant for you, like how the interaction was part of that history of data pedagogy in your work.
Let me try to read them again just to make sure that we understood.
Oh yeah, no problem. My understanding of the question is that essentially saying like there's a relationship between history and data, and how does interaction in your workshops, how is that also related to that history?
Yeah, well, I think that we try to tackle this in many different ways. The workshop, I think there are 2 things that happen at the workshop at the same time. So first part is very hands-on, that we're literally just teaching people how to weave a little weaving loom, introducing them to like the terms and the jargons, and that happens for programming as well. So we try to kind of split these like 2 parts of the workshop, that like first you learn how to weave and then you learn how to code. But in parallel to all of this, we are talking through the history of weaving and how that is connected to the history of computing and coding, right? So the way that we're looking into like connecting the history data into like, you know, like the actual workshop and the hands-on is that we're trying to help folks to like make like be socialized with that connection and then hopefully like have their own reflections and their own connections on that. I think like that's one thing that from the workshops, we get a lot of like the conversations just happening and we end up learning things as well. Like there are a lot of like reflections happening. And there's definitely a lot of like data that conducts our story. I'm just seeing the additional comments on the question. So like as an example, like I think for the exhibitions, like it's more of like how do we want to tell this story and what is like the either like the linearity of it or not, how we decide to like put this together. For the climate tartan as an example, I think there's like a more direct data visualization aspect to it, that like we had like very hard numbers that we had to then figure out how to translate into a tartan pattern, right? So
Yeah, and I would add to that too. I think there's a big element of what's the data we're looking at, right? Like that it's a whole world, like even like how this data was collected, what do we look at? I think we always talk about how we really feel like being in the Southern Hemisphere, we really learn history through a written language in books that came from who colonized us. However, is that really the data that really tells the story of our culture? So should we be looking and expanding our concept of information to more beyond that? And that's where I think folk art really comes. That's where patterns come. That's where colors come. Like all these histories that had really shaped the cultures that have shaped us are hidden in those objects. So are not hidden only in the what we see regularly as data or as information. And that's why I think we talk a lot about the materials and the materiality of things, because sometimes maybe it's a drawing, maybe it's a weaving piece, maybe it's a pattern. But we try to also find the data and the information in those kinds of spaces too.
mhm.
Thank you, Laura. Did you have a question this morning to start us off with?
Sure, I guess I could have just unmuted, but yeah, I was just really inspired by the various ways that you're engaging curating and workshop and exhibition as pedagogy and inviting people in, also staying with those communities and working with them more deeply. And I would just love to hear more about like where you look to for inspiration for those kinds of practices.
Oh, okay. That's so many ways of answering this. I do love that. Um, I think that maybe like going back to our starting point to our collaboration, which was that class that we talked about, teaching as art. It was facilitated by educator and artist Yoon Choi. In one of the readings there, which like I had I had recently read was The Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire. And I think that for me was a very fundamental reading to understand that like we need to try to break the pattern in order to like bring different perspectives into the history that we know of. And I think like even though like when we started, I think the focus was really like the connection between weaving and computing. It definitely has been shifting towards the history of weaving within itself, even like the way that like as an example, like heddles and like floor looms, they've been inspired by like African textile production traditions that like you don't see that often in like books, you know, like saying and how like we got to like floor looms with like four heddles. Like we don't talk about this, right? So like there's also like a lot of things within that. And I think we play around a lot um, about what are the ways that people can learn. I think we definitely love when we can get hands-on with more theory. Like they kind of complement each other. But I think even like within the hands-on, we've been kind of pushing we're trying to push the boundary, right? Like we started with like the physical weaving looms, but then we're doing this like augmented reality objects and trying to figure out is this a way that people can learn as well, right? Even though they're not like touching things, but then to Fran's point, like it makes it more accessible because it's now online and you can like, you literally place the object and you can like go inside the object, right? You get like that type of like granular detail that even in a museum, because of how conservation works, like you don't get to see like this close up, you know? So I think there's like a lot around that we try to play, and we're definitely like very fortunate to have all these opportunities to just like experiment. So even this next workshop or lecture that we're gonna give in Boulder, that's gonna be like a completely new format to us. So it's really exciting that we can get to like iterate things as we engage with people.
I think there was also a lot of inspiration. Besides the fact that I feel we both get inspired by absolutely every single thing we see. I think we're that kind of people, but I think at that point there was also a lot of inspiration on thinking how, of course, you think about the Bauhaus movement, and then you think about Black Mountain College, and these new spaces for a different way of learning and teaching started emerging, and we genuinely like love that. And of course, as very like Annie Albers and Joseph Albers fans, just seeing how they brought that knowledge and how they will share that. And there was something that really spoke to me. I mean, when people talk about like why Annie Albers became a textile artist, it was because she couldn't take any other class. Why? Because she was a woman. So, okay, so you are not gonna take what the rest take. You can go and weave. And I think there was also something about that, like giving access to everyone for everything, that also make us think, how can we make a lot of these knowledge more accessible, and even how can we push it? Like we've both been teachers and students. How can we push that to really find new ways of collaboration? And the funny thing, you think about how traditionally people will weave, you can think about this circle of people sitting around talking to each other while they do that. So how can we really bring that community aspect to the way we teach? So I think that is also part of that.
Maybe just to add one last thing is that even though like we facilitate all these events, it doesn't mean that we don't attend other people's events. Like I think like that's also like a big part of our process, is like learning from other folks, either like artists or researchers or educators that are also trying to bring up different perspectives. So I think that also that's a big thing for us. You know, just because we're hosting things, it doesn't mean that we are not, you know, we're constantly learning as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. I just love how your practice ties back to like Annie Albers' indigenous knowledges, brings it back, places it inside of contemporary culture, and then you're using the state-of-the-art technology to engage the public. So there's this way in which you're really pushing back against that idea of like weaving as some sort of like lost or old-fashioned sort of way of working. And I just really appreciate that in the work that you both do. We have a question here that is also near and dear to my heart, which is if you're in touch with local weaving guilds or regional groups of weavers, and how do you integrate that sort of knowledge into your practice as well?
Yeah. We have been in the past in touch with like regional weaving guilds. I think when we went to Santa Fe, we had the opportunity to work with one weaving guild close by. Apologies, I forgot the name of the city, but it's really close to Santa Fe, and it was like really fun because they learned about the event and they were like, "Oh, we want to host you and learn more about you." I think that's definitely something that we want to explore more. Um, it's interesting because me and Francesca, when we first started, we would always kind of like give a full disclosure for whoever attended our workshops. So like we're not weavers nor coders. So we're in kind of this like limbo place of what community we fit in as, you know, like creatives who like do explore a little bit of that. So that's definitely something that we want to uh, be more like, we definitely want to be more in touch with like local guilds and so on.
Yeah, I think what there's also one of the projects that I show, the encrypted bridge, I think we like that also came a lot from really just going and visiting these communities of weavers in Peru, which is where I'm from, and really seeing their process from everything, like how they will like take the material, how they would dye the material, how would they weave together with each other. even like I remember being like, I'm like, why are you doing that yellow? Yellow is corn. Do you know what corn means for us? So you're like, oh, okay, interesting. And you start finding all these different, like when you see a pattern, you are not like reading a text, but you are reading something. It's just a different way of looking at it. So I think that was also something that like inspired a lot. We love seeing like I think it was some years ago that we really learned about these Mayan weavers in Guatemala that were creating this sort of dictionary of patterns. They will just weaving absolutely every single pattern that existed because you don't want that history to die. So I think that's why we're like very motivated to like get to know more about that and spend time with them. They are carrying the actual knowledge. That like knowledge is a knowledge that should never die. That really shapes so much of who we are. So yeah, we're like we take inspiration on that a lot.
Oh, thank you. It's so exciting to hear that. And yes, we had a lot of comments in the thread saying you need to, of course, connect with the Weavers Guild here in Boulder, and we'll be happy to make those connections. Thanks, y'all, for your suggestions in the chat. This is such a great community. I want to hand it over to Laura to see if you had any other questions or any other announcements you wanted to share with us this morning.
No, I just wanted to say thank you so much. I maybe wanted to go back up the question chain. There were two from Ari Lee. That I wanted to just bring attention to. One was just about like maybe some of the specific ways you're bringing weaving and coding together. If you just want to share quickly, something we might all be able to practice, right?
Yeah, so I'm seeing it's the specific activities you do in the workshop, right? We normally kick off with some sort of like introduction and like things. We really try to frame it in a way of like we want to demystify these both practices to you. So like what are the things that you think of that like it was really hard when you thought about learning, but then as you learn, you're like, okay, it's not that scary. So we always kind of start with that, and then we start introducing folks to like the vocabulary within weaving and within coding. We then go into like a hands-on activity where everyone is just like going from scratch. You're warping your little loom, you're choosing the threads and the yarns and the colors that you want. Maybe you're like even sketching them out. Like we definitely give them like all possible ways that they could like think of patterns and what they want to design. And then once they have something like in the loom, like that activity wraps up, we go into like the coding part. So we introduce the interface and the logic of coding. One thing that we do a lot is like, as we're explaining that, we try to connect that to weaving. So we would say something like, like whatever is like looping here, it's almost as if you're like weaving a single line and so on, right? Might seem basic, but we always like come from the place of like we shouldn't assume that people know everything. And then from there we kind of challenge them to try to design like program the pattern that they did on the weaving loom on P5. And from there, like we just see we try to like assess what is the crowd feeling like, what they're more interested in, and go from there, from like either drilling down to like a specific practice or like sharing more like works that are in that intersection.
I think you can see we've been discovering so many, and then from the beginning, right? Like, okay, so everybody, we're gonna learn how to code a for loop. Okay, so that means that you're gonna be like you're telling the computer to repeat an action. When we're weaving, we are repeating an action. Maybe we're going up and down, up and down. So we start making those analogies as part of the content that we are like sharing the workshop, like Renata said. And I think that even if you think about our exhibitions, the way we structure the content is so we can make those parallels at the same time. So in Warp in the Future, you see like the second station was really about highlighting. And that's why the Jacquard loom becomes this very, very important piece in this history, because you can really highlight the analogy between what were the punch cards, maybe not call like punch cards at that point, but in the Jacquard loom that will help you create patterns, and what are the punch cards from like the IBM punch cards on how you will code information. So we do try to find those, those ways. I mean, at the end, a lot of like teaching and sharing content is about making analogies between things. So I think that's what we try to bring as part of that.
Oh, I really appreciate that. And thank you. Given that we're coming up to the end of the hour, I just wanted to maybe say on behalf of all of us here in Boulder, specifically me and Stephen and Etta, who've all had a big role in coordinating this event and the series overall. And to everyone who joined us today, just thank you much. Thank you much. Thank you so much for spending your time with us this morning or afternoon or evening, wherever you're at. It's been lovely to be able to share this space with you. And if you want to revisit anything, we will post this onto the YouTube. Let's say this correctly. Stephen will post this to the YouTube pretty quickly, within a week, I would say. So keep an eye out for it. And I hope you all have an inspiring and positive rest of your day. And maybe we can all try to weave something. Touch thread. Go touch
Thank
thread.
you.
All right. Bye.
Yeah.
Have a good day.
Bye all.
Thank you
Thank you.
again.